Hey, everybody. Good to see you. We're back for yet another great late night chat. I really hope that you all are having a lovely, lovely night. So, yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, 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 everybody. So glad to be here with all of you once again. We stream a little bit later on Wednesday nights because we have our weekly members check-in for CPI. Just had a great meeting. Shout out to all our members who were there, and our membership is rising. People are joining CPI around the country. It's great, and we're trying to follow up with all the new members, and it's good stuff happening. But yeah, we're going to have yet another great late night conversation. We're going to follow our normal procedure, our normal, it makes it sound like we're having surgery or something like that, but our normal, method, our normal mode, our normal format, which is first I give my opening remarks. Then from there, we do the roll call. And then after that, I answer your questions for the remainder of the night. So if you got any questions you want to send in, Rumble rants are appreciated. Cash App, Caleb Alpha 22. But the best way to send questions is buymeacoffee.com. It's really awesome. Just go to Buy Me a Coffee, send in your question. That's a great way to do it. So yeah, that's what we're doing now. In terms of announcements, a lot of people are very concerned that there may be some kind of attack on Iran, and we at the Center for Political Innovation have called a national day of action to oppose attacking Iran. Oppose what they're now calling Epstein's war. If Trump were to attack Iran, it would be Epstein's war. And so that's on February 28th. We around the country are going to be in the streets saying, don't attack Iran. So if you're a member of the Center for Political Innovation, get in touch, figure out how to have a small rally in your area. If you are, if you are somebody else who wants to get involved, get in touch with us. We're going to have some small actions to say hands off Iran. We don't know what's going to happen, but hands off Iran. That is certainly something that we're trying to raise the alarm about in terms of announcements. So other than that, we're going to have our normal live stream tonight. First, the opening remarks, then the roll call, and then I answer people's questions. So if there is something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the program, the best thing for you to do would be to send me a buy me a coffee question. Rumble rants are appreciated. Also, I answer questions to that, but the best way is buy me a coffee. All right, so let's jump right into it. Got a couple things on my mind tonight. First things first, right? Before we get into Odin and Valhalla and Christianity and all kinds of stuff like that, I want to just talk about this, right? Is Trump going to attack Iran? I don't know. I really hope not. And one thing that I would urge people to do is think about the words that you say. The message now on social media should be, don't attack Iran. Trump should not attack Iran. We don't need a war for Jeffrey Epstein. The American people don't want this war. The American people have voted to oppose these wars. That should be the message. And one thing I continue to see from people, and I get a little annoyed, I get a little hot under the collar when I see this, is people who are on our side and don't want this war saying, Trump is going to attack Iran. I knew it. Well, he hasn't done it yet. And we don't want it to happen. And, if you're about to have a test and you announce, I'm going to fail this test, are you likely to do well on the test? No. And if you're telling everyone, oh, it's a foregone conclusion, it's already going to happen, just get used to it, you're advocating for the other side. You may say you don't want this war in Iran, but if you're already announcing it's going to happen, I was right, you're not helping anything. Right now, the message should be don't attack Iran. We don't need Epstein's war. Oppose this danger of war. Don't just get into this defeated place. That is my urgent message. Don't get into this defeated place of, oh yeah, this thing that I'm against is going to happen and we should all just get used to it. No, don't do that. Right? Don't work against us, right? That who knows what could happen. I don't know what is in the works. You know, we've had some close calls and scares when it comes to Iran before, and I don't want a war with Iran. But the last thing we need is people that don't want a war with Iran just saying, oh, it's happening. There's nothing we can do about it. That's not a helpful message. It's not a helpful message at all. We need to be loudly saying, don't attack Iran. So I just wanted to get that out of my system. But the main thing that I wanted to talk about tonight, something I've been thinking about, right? So I've written about this before, but it is a theme that I come back to. In Germany and in Denmark and Sweden and Norway and in Scandinavia, as well as in Central Europe, Germany, etc., Belgium, Austria, places like that, before they were Christianized by the Roman Empire, the Germanic tribes and the Vikings, the Norsemen, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, they worshipped a god called Odin. And Odin was this mythical god that promoted valor. And if you want to learn about Odin, you can read the very important book that I got a lot out of, Heroes, Hero Worship, and the Heroic in History. The first chapter is all about Odin. And that the ancient Norsemen, the pre-Christian Europeans, they worshipped Odin. And Odin was a god of grit and valor and sacrifice. He was an old man with a beard. And Odin had a special heaven called Valhalla that you only got to go into if you died in battle. And Odin was somebody you prayed to in order to get epic strength so you could just go out and defeat your enemy and, you know, be full of courage and have a battle high. You know, some of these Vikings would actually take mushrooms, magic mushrooms, and get high on mushrooms before they went into battle. And they called them berserkers. So if you ever heard that expression, they went berserk, what that was, that's from the ancient Vikings that would take mushrooms. So they were, they wouldn't feel pain or they were stoned or whatever. And they would go and fight in battle. And people said they were berserk. They were insane because they didn't feel any pain because they were high on mushrooms. And that, the Viking raiders, the Vandal tribes, the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, they prayed to this god called Odin. And they worshipped strength and grit and valor. And that was their religion. And Odinism, I guess, is currently practiced by a lot of prisoners. A lot of white prisoners in American jails worship Odin. And there's a lot of Nazis and white supremacists who worship Odin. Odin is a pre-Christian deity of Europe. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I have noted that a lot of American culture has Odinist overtones, right? That Odinism is a big influence on the American mindset, the American way of life. And you wouldn't think, though. We're always hearing that this is a Christian nation founded by, English religious dissenters and people coming here for religious freedom. And it tends to be Christianity that is considered the American way. However, first of all, American Christmas, right? American Christmas, we have Santa Claus. And this guy who comes around once a year, who's got a really long beard, and he comes around once a year. That was Odin, right? Odin was a guy with a big long beard who came around once a year on Yuletide to blow life back into the earth. And they celebrated his coming with wreaths on the door. A lot of the American Christmas traditions, Christmas trees, Christmas wreaths, that's Odinism. Santa Claus, right? Man who comes around once a year, jolly old man with a beard who comes around Christmas time, around the Yuletide or whatever. That's very Odinist. The other thing, and I can't get over this enough, and this is what I wanted to talk about. Right? I will never forget, right? And this is actually illegal according to the U.S. Supreme Court, but it probably still goes on And it's not the worst thing in the world, right? There was a time in my life where I got angry over this kind of thing. I don't really get angry over it. It's just a reality. And I think it doesn't happen as much as it used to. But in my little town in Ohio, before the basketball game, before the football game, right, you would see all the players and the coach would join hands and pray before the game, right? That probably still happens. You go to the southern towns, right? You go to the Midwest, more conservative areas, right? And it's illegal in a public school. In a public school, the U.S. government is not supposed to have any state-sanctioned prayer. School staff cannot be leading any religious ritual, but it probably still goes on. In my town, they just completely ignored that. We had 2 prayers at graduation, not just one, and before every football game, before every basketball game, all the players were joining hands, led by the coach, and they would pray before the game. And I look back on that and I realize that what were these players and coaches praying before the game? What were they praying? Were they praying, "Dear Jesus, help me love the other team. Help me see things from the other team's perspective. Help me to feel, be in touch with God with all my heart and soul and mind, and help me to love the other team as I love myself, and think about other people and how I affect them and live for the sake of it." They're not praying that. They're not praying that. You know what they're praying before the basketball game, before the football game. They're there saying, "Dear God, help me to play as hard as I possibly can. Give me the biggest amount of strength that I could possibly have to just go out there on the field and just demolish the other team. Let me just vanquish the other team and just demolish them and win the giant trophy. Give me the strength to be a sports hero like I watch on ESPN or in my favorite sports movie. Let me be big and strong and powerful and demolish my opponent and walk away victorious as the one who fought the hardest." That's what they're praying. And that's what they're praying, right? Anyone who knows anything about football and basketball and sport culture, that's what they're praying. Well, that's not a Christian prayer. That's an Odinist prayer. Jesus is not telling his followers, "If you worship me, I will make you strong and powerful, and I'll teach you how to go out and sacrifice and fight." And that's not in the Bible. That's not in the Bible, right? They're not praying to Jesus before the basketball game, right? That you are not praying to Jesus before the basketball game. You're not praying to the Christian God before the basketball game. You're praying to Odin. Right? Oh, if you want to go out and sacrifice, right? The story is that Odin had a special heaven, Valhalla, that only those who died in battle could go to. And so when the old Norsemen were on their dying beds, they would take knives and they would cut themselves so that Odin would think they had died on the battlefield and would allow them to enter the halls of Valhalla. Right? That's Odinism, right? And that the tradition of praying before sporting events and the prayers that they are praying are very, very, very Odinist. So that's the one thing. They're very, very competitive. They're very much about grit and valor and sacrifice and triumph. And, that's Odinism, my friends. That is not Christianity. But then I've said this for years. This is nothing new. I've been talking about Odinism and the Odinist influence on American culture for years, right? And how the kind of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps attitude that's part of the American culture is not just, we always blame that on Calvinism, right? About the Protestant work ethic and all that. I think it goes back a little bit deeper, right? And America is a very German country. One point, Miller was the most common last name. That's a German last name. It comes from Muller, right? What is the most American food? Hot dog. What's a hot dog? That's a Frankfurter, a Frankfurt sausage. So they started calling it hot dogs after World War I because we didn't want to be eating a German food. And a hamburger. Is there any ham on your burger? No, right? Hamburgers are not made out of pig. They're not made out of swine, right? The hamburger is made out of cow. So why do they call it a hamburger? That's because it's a sandwich that came from Hamburg, Germany. That's why it was a hamburger sandwich, right? It was, a sandwich from Hamburg. So America is very, very German, and that I would argue that there's a very, very Odinist influence. But then the other day, I was thinking about a song, and I'm not going to play the song on here because I think this song, actually, it is a Christian song that I heard endlessly growing up, which is actually apparently not that popular anymore. And I'm not going to play it on here because I think it is blasphemous. I think it is wrong, but it was one of the most popular evangelical Christian songs of the 90s and early 2000s. And I remember it. Our God is an awesome God, right? Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. And I sang that at many church camps and many gatherings as a kid growing up. It's just a really common evangelical song from that era. It's funny. I was someplace and I remember hearing them play it on Christian radio. And the announcer said, I think we're going to be hearing this song for the next 100 years. This song is so important. And actually, I don't hear it anymore. It's really not that popular anymore. I think our culture has changed a lot. But regardless, it was a big Christian song from the 90s and stuff. I think Rich Mullins, is that his name? Rich Mullins is the guy who originally sang it. But I was thinking about that song the other day, and I realized that song, that's an Odinist song, and it's actually quite an evil song. There is very, very little in that song. There's one line about like if you read the verses of the song, right? It's about God kicking them out of Eden. It's about God destroying Sodom and Gomorrah. It's about God, punishing people. And there's very little in that song. There's one line about the mercy and grace he gave us at the cross. But almost every line in that song is God is big and mighty and powerful and punishes people. And on top of that, it's also you better get in line or else God is going to punish you. It's an awful song. The other thing that's weird, you took the words out of my mouth, Ryan. Why is it our God? Right? Christianity says there's only one God. So why are we singing about our God is an awesome God? No, it should be God is an awesome God. But our God is stronger than your God. That's Odin. That's Odin. That's what Odin said. Oh, there were many gods. The Norsemen, they believed in multiple gods, but they believed their God, Odin, was the most mighty and strong God of them all. Right? It's a song called Awesome God, Gabby, which I sang at church camp. I sang growing up. It was just a really big part of being, a young Christian in the 2000s. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. I'm not going to play it on here because I think it's an evil song. And I think about that song, and it's Odinism, right? The message of the song is not that God loves and forgives. It's not to live for the sake of others, love your neighbor as yourself. It's not about doing what's right. It's about God is big and mighty and powerful, and he's going to kill and destroy people who get in his way, and we're on his team, and so that's awesome. And also, we better be good or he's going to kill and destroy us. It ends. I think the last line of the song is, he's coming soon. He's going to return. So we better not forget that he's awesome. Like, so God's going to come back, right? He's going to return and punish all of us. And if we don't get in line, it's a really, really, really non-Christian song. It's really, really dark, and it's really, really, but when you think about it, it's also, and this is what I was thinking about, it's a very, very unhealthy parental transference, right? So we talk about Sigmund Freud on here. I believe Sigmund Freud was not a good dude. I think he was probably a sociopath to some degree or other, but because he was kind of indifferent to other people's emotions, he sat down with people. He had a lot of people on the couch. He interviewed prisoners and college students, thousands of them, and just asked them about their lives and their personal feelings. And he started to understand what drives people. He came up with the concept that you have an ego, which is your conscious mind. You have an id, which is your bodily desires. You have a superego, which is, the parental figure that you look up to, that you want to please, right? Teenagers, they have the Oedipal drive. They want to kill their parents. They want to rebel. You have your sexual feelings and aggression are linked, but you also have transference. You have this desire for a parental figure that's all powerful, that can take care of you. It's like from the time you're an infant, a baby will die if it doesn't have a parent who takes care of it, right? So we all have this need for a parental figure who will take care of us. We all want to kill our parents because we want to rebel, and we all, have a sex drive, and we have libido, and that there are different impulses that manifest themselves throughout life. This is all Sigmund Freud, and I think it's actually very, very brilliant. This is how humans think, right? And that they have different impulses and drives, and that I tend to think that the psychoanalytic approach of like helping you to become aware of your impulses, what is motivating you, is actually a very helpful thing. I don't think Freud was a good guy, and to some degree or other, he used it for self-gain, right? He was having sex with all the women who were his clients, and he also, at the same time, he was, using it to make money, and he was a very indifferent person. He just he didn't care about people. He lacked empathy, and he was very anti-religious. If you read Civilization and its discontents, he says he can't relate to this universal feeling of oneness that all of his clients that are Christians say they feel like they can connect to God, they can connect to a higher power. And he says, I can't relate to this at all. This is weird. Maybe it's left over from, Freud was not a good dude, but bad people can have useful insights. And in fact, I think that Freud had useful insights because he was a bad person. If it had been anybody else doing his work, they probably would have they would have connected with the people too much to actually just kind of sit back and look at them. Freud was looking at his clients kind of like a scientist, dissecting a frog or something. He didn't care. He lacked human empathy. And because he lacked human empathy, he could kind of look at humans in this kind of cold way and be like, okay, what motivates them? And that caused him to have brilliant insights into how people think. And I think that's very, very important. So back to the main point, which is that Freud said we all have this desire for a parental figure who will protect us, right? And that manifests itself in terms of religion. That's one thing that everybody acknowledges, right? Why is it all the prayers is God our Father, right? Or Heavenly Parent, right? Or whatever, right? I mean, that God is the ultimate superego. God is the conscience, the voice of right, the one challenging you to do the right thing. And Christianity teaches you'll never be good enough, right? You'll never be good enough, and that you will never be good enough for your superego, right? You have a voice in your head that is always saying you could do better. It's saying you could treat people better. You could be kinder to people. You could achieve and work harder, right? You have a superego, right, that is never satisfied. And that's a part of the guilt that we all have. And if you look at Christianity, right, the idea is that none of us are good enough for God, right? That all of us, all of us fall short of the expectations of God. All of us are sinners, but luckily through Jesus Christ, we can receive forgiveness, right? So we're never going to be good enough for God. But God is this very forgiving person, and Jesus died on the cross so we can all receive forgiveness. So it's going to be all right. And that it's good to have somebody in your head. And it's good to have something that is demanding the impossible from you, demanding that you do the best you possibly can, pushing you to be better. But it's also good that voice is very, very forgiving. And that the Christian message is do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? Jesus is asked by his I think it's the Pharisees confront Jesus, and they say to Jesus, they say to him, which of the 10 commandments is the most important commandment? Which one is it? And he says, the most important commandment is to love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And everything else will flow from that. All the other laws flow from that. And so they were trying to trick him by getting him in trouble for saying that one commandment was more important than the other. And he said all the commandments really just boil down to being in love with the creator and with the higher power, with the universal prime energy that created the world, and caring about other people and having empathy, right? And that if you can do that, of course you're not going to steal. Of course you're not going to murder. Of course you're not going to commit adultery. Of course you're not going to do all these other things, right? Because you're loving your creator and you're loving other people, right? And that it's more about your intentions rather than the letter of the law. And that was, Jesus is fighting with the Pharisees and the scribes, and he's saying to them, look, you guys are stuck on the legalism, on the, crossing the I and dotting the T. Whereas my message is if we can just have the right, if our heart can be right, we won't have to have that, right? And another example is Jesus is confronted for healing people on the Sabbath. He's healing people on the Sabbath. right? And they confront him and they say, you're violating the laws of the Sabbath. And he says to the Pharisees, the Sabbath was created for man. Man was not created for the Sabbath. These rules weren't invented so we can arbitrarily follow them. Rather, the idea is that human beings need a day of rest. They need a day to chill out. They can't work, all week. They need, after 6 days of work, you need a day to rest. And that the Sabbath was invented for man. Man was not invented for the Sabbath. And that the leaders, the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the scribes, they were all caught up in this legalism. And Jesus is saying, actually, you got to get your heart right. And that's Christianity, right? And there's an element of parental transference. The idea is God is the ultimate superego who's pushing you to do the right thing. But if you fail to do the right thing, he will forgive you. And that's what's amazing about Christianity. This is Christianity from a psychoanalytic perspective. This is Christianity from I'm looking at this from many different angles in my life. I come out of Marxism. That's my background and tradition. But I also, I've studied psychoanalysis. I'm become more religious. And so I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this, and that song, Awesome God, if you look at it, that is a very, very unhealthy parental transference, in that it sees the parent as a harsh, cruel punisher, right? I mean, the song might as well be called "My Dad Could Beat Up Your Dad." Might as well be what it's called, right? It's our God, as if there are other gods, is the strongest and the most mighty, and he kicked him out of Eden, and he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's rolling up his sleeves. It's basically, that's what the song is saying. It's like, my dad is such a mean, big, strong bully, and when people get in his way, he beats the crap out of them, and I'm terrified of him, and I better obey him. But, you mess with him, other people that are on the other team, he's going to kick your ass, right? I mean, it's a really, really unhealthy parental transference. My dad is a very violent, abusive punisher, is basically what it's saying. And he will violently abuse you if you get on my way. So luckily he's on my team, but I better obey him or else he's going to violently, abusively punish me. It's pretty messed up, right? That's not a healthy relationship, right? That's not a healthy way that one should interact with one's father. I mean, that's like someone who has been very badly abused, right? Somebody who, somebody who at the same time that they're abused is kind of their parents' property, right? And that's one thing about kind of abusive parental relationships, is like, on the one hand, the parent is very abusive to the child, giving them harsh punishments, doling out and expressing their anger on the child. But then on the other hand, right, if one other kid touches their kid, they run down there and they grab that kid. You don't touch my son, right? And that tends to be how abusive people tend to be, right? Is that they're very possessive. They take people and they view them as possessions, right? And this is domestic violence in relationships. An abusive husband, right? He will be very, very much see his wife as his possession. So if his wife pisses him off, he'll be abusive to her. But if some other man whistles at his wife, or if he'll threaten them and beat them up, it's like they're seeing God as the image of an abusive father figure, of an abusive, possessive father figure. That's what they're seeing God as. That's very unhealthy. It's very, very unhealthy, right? A parent, right? It is a drive that we all have, but, a parent who will push you to do the best that you can, a parent who will love and forgive you, will comfort you when you're down, right? That's a much more healthier thing. But that song, Awesome God, is a very, very Odinist song about God is so mighty and so powerful, but it's also a very, very unhealthy parental transference. That's really what it is. And you think about a lot that has been written about, well, I don't know, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I was thinking about that, and I'm like, that song is very, very Odinist. And that song is not very Christian. There's not much in that song about loving your neighbor as yourself. There's not much in that song about forgiveness and forgiving people. There's not much in that song about, it's all just grit and valor and sacrifice. So on these streams, many times I have talked about this, and that I see an overlap between philosophical irrationalism and Odinism. They're not the same thing. Philosophical irrationalism says there is no truth. Odinism is a religion that existed in Europe prior to Christianity. That was a religion that very much said might makes right, but it was collectivist. It was a collectivist religion. I mean, it wasn't individualist, right? Those Vikings all worked together, right? But it was very much a religion that didn't value, it valued team solidarity, right? Of we're all on the same team, right? In our tribe, and we're going to be mighty, and we have this mighty God that we pray to. So it wasn't individualist, and it wasn't saying that there is no truth and you can define the truth with your will. It wasn't radical individualism and anti-collectivism, which is a big part of Nietzsche and Ayn Rand and Leo Strauss and all of that. So it's not the same as philosophical irrationalism, but it still has this lack of, that collectivism, to be real collectivism, requires empathy. You have to care about other people if you're going to be working together as a team. And you have to have compassion, and you have to be willing to forgive people who make mistakes. And that collectivism requires people to be nice. There is mean collectivism out there, right? There is, I mean, that's a whole history. They talk about collective punishment, right? If one kid is talking, they punish the whole class, and then the idea is that all the other kids will be mad at that kid, and that'll make that kid stop talking. So collectivism can be mean. Collectivism can be punitive, right? There's no question about it. There is not all collectivism is kind, but to have real collectivism, when people really feel like they're on the same team, you do need to have compassion and kindness. So now Huey Long disagrees with my analysis of the song, and that's fine. And you're allowed to disagree with me, but I tell me where I'm wrong. I don't see that song as healthy. I see that song as a very, very dark song. And the other thing is that, and again, our God, right? What is that? Right? It's not God, it's our God, as if there are other gods and he's going to beat down and destroy them. That's very Odinist, and that's really unhealthy. But the other thing is, there was a general in the Bush era, right? I remember when the USA invaded Iraq, General Boykin was a member of the U.S. military, who was a big Bush supporter and evangelical. And he actually said, our God is stronger than their God. That's what he said about the war against Islam. He said, our God is stronger than their God, right? Boykin, our God, right? General Boykin, Jerry Boykin, Lieutenant General Jerry Boykin of the Delta Force. And he worked with the Family Research Council. He said, the reason we're in a war against Islam and our God is stronger than their God, right? And he said, I know that my God is real and that their God is an idol. And that he tells the Muslims, you have underestimated our God, right? This guy he was using our God. He was saying that over and over again as he was justifying kind of a war against Islam, right? And you listen to that guy. I don't think that guy was associated with Family Research Council. He was an evangelical Christian, but you look at the statements that William Boykin, the U.S. Army general, made, right? His remarks about the U.S. battling Satan. It was in 2003. He said, the war on terror is the U.S. battling Satan. He said, quote, I knew my God was bigger than his. I knew that my God was real. It was a real God, and his God was an idol. Ouch. And then also he said, George W. Bush, why is this man in the White House? The majority of Americans did not vote for him. Why is he there? I tell you this morning, is that he is in the White House because God put him there. There you go. George W. Bush was not elected by a majority of the voters. He was appointed by God. That's a direct quote from this guy, Jerry Boykin. And so at the same time, the USA was invading Iraq, as the neoconservatives were riding high. The Bush administration was the height of neoconservatism. Part of it was the evangelical Christian right. And the evangelical Christian right was very much Odinist. It was Odinism dressed up as Christianity in a lot of ways, right? I mean, and you read the statements. I can show you. This is actually his wiki quote page, right? You can read all the stuff Jerry Boykin said. That stuff and the song, that I've been referencing here, that I won't be singing for you all, it all matches, right? It all matches. And so I just wanted to share that with all of you tonight. It's not a hugely profound point that I'm making. but I just wanted to share that with all of you. And I am gonna, well, anyway, I'm gonna talk about like one more thing, and then I'm gonna start reading from my new book, and then I'll answer any questions that come in. So one more thing I wanted to talk about is Cuba, right? Obviously, we're all very upset about the threats against Iran right now. We're having a CPI National Day of Action to support Iran, to call for no war against Iran on February 28th. So that's one thing we're working on. But Cuba, the situation regarding Cuba is pretty crazy. Cuba has got electricity for less than 6 hours a day because of this oil embargo, where Venezuela's had their arm twisted. They can't get oil from Venezuela. And Russia has sent some oil and is planning to send more. Mexico is planning to send some oil. But the big thing is there's a group of people who have gotten royally screwed by this shift in policy on Cuba that are mad about it. And those folks are Cuban Americans. A lot of Cuban Americans, right? When we think of Cuban Americans, we think of Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is a Miami Cuban, a neocon, a fanatical anti-communist, a fanatical Israel supporter, right? And that's true for the Cuban Americans who fled, right? The Cuban Americans who fled Cuba when they were kids or older, right? Who remember when the revolution happened, they were on the losing side, they came here, right? And they talk about the Gusanos, right? There's a fanatical Republican neocon, wing of Cuban Americans, but their kids and their grandkids don't all agree with them. Now, they're not communists. Most of them are not communists. And most of them, still buy a standard anti-communist line about Cuba. Now, there's exceptions. Our buddy Mike Martinez out in Miami, he's, I played videos of him before. He's a Cuban American who grew up, in an anti-communist, Cuban family, but he eventually, became a sympathetic supporter of the Cuban Revolution. But there's a lot of Cuban Americans now that they're not communists, but they're not like their parents. They're not fanatical anti-communists, right? And a lot of them are really upset about the fact that all the travel agencies in Miami that used to facilitate them going to visit their family have been closed down. A lot of people worked at those travel agencies. You can't visit Cuba now. The travel ban is being enforced more rigidly than ever before. On top of that, a lot of Cuban Americans send their relatives money, remittances. That's now illegal. Care packages are now illegal. The policies that Marco Rubio has imposed are hurting a lot of Cuban Americans who maybe they don't believe in communism, but they want to send their relatives a birthday card. They can't do it. They want to send their relatives some plastic bags and some duct tape, and they can't do it. They want to go visit their relatives. They can't do it. And that it looks like there is that very, very active and very, very wealthy wing of the Cuban American community that is neoconservative, obsessively anti-communist. But it looks like there are a lot of other Cuban Americans who disagree. And Cuba, what they're doing to Cuba is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, you're blocking an island from having the most vital commodity on the world market. Cuba can get oil from Venezuela. They can get oil from Russia. They can get oil from Mexico. But now the USA is going to try to prevent that. That's terrifying and that's insane. And, they're trying to prevent Cuba from importing food products. I mean, they're just like, Cuba has got a strong economy. They've got tourism and all this, but the embargo has been escalated like crazy by Marco Rubio. It's utterly insane. And it looks like there's starting to be some blowback. And I'm hearing whispers that there could be some real blowback from this insane Cuban policy that Marco Rubio is pushing. And that, I can only hope. I know that, we at CPI are in touch with various people that are protesting and demanding that, Cuba be able to import medicine and people be able to travel there and all of that. And I'm getting a sense that there's starting to be some blowback. Let's let's just talk about this for one brief moment before I start reading my book. Part of the reason that things are a little bit weird right now in American politics is that the left stopped being anti-war, like during the Obama administration. The left became more pro-war, especially when it comes to Russia, but especially around the deranged, regime change, George Soros, color revolution, rainbow flag, cruise missile. We got regime change, became a woke liberal thing, and we started to have people on the right that are isolationists, mainly because a lot of conservative people are, tied in with the military, and people in the military are more anti-war than ever. They don't want to get shot, and they're like, what are we doing getting shot around the world for what? What is this doing for America? And the Ron Paul sentiment that started again during the Obama years really has escalated. A lot of people in the military, more people in the military tend to be conservative, and they are more anti-war than anybody. And the regime change wars are being promoted by liberal NGOs tied to George Soros. And so American politics is all out of whack. It's all completely out of whack, right? And then they started the Trump is secretly working for Russia. They started that bullshit, that hoax, right? To get all the woke people to be on board with having a war against Russia. And so politics in America is all out of whack. It used to be the left were anti-war and the right were pro-war. Now the right is more anti-war than the left, except when it comes to Latin America. And that's one of the weird things. For some reason, and I'll explain why, but for some reason, it's true. Obama established diplomatic relations with Cuba and visited Cuba, met Raul Castro. As bad as Obama was to Venezuela, he didn't kidnap Maduro. And that it seems like the right is more pro-war for South and Central America, and the left is more anti-war for South and Central America. But on everything else, the right is more anti-war than the left. That's kind of where we're at. Now, there's also a lot of anti-China hysteria on the right, but it's not universal. There are a lot of people on the right who don't buy into the anti-China stuff. And the anti-China stuff is kind of, they don't want a war with China. They just think China is bad, right? They think China is bad. They don't want a war with China as much. But when it comes to invade Venezuela, invade Cuba, that's those folks. And what this is about is it's related to the fact that the left is more in touch with Europe, right? That was Obama's big thing, is during his presidential campaign, he went to Berlin and he campaigned in Berlin. And it was to say, if you elect me, I will restore relations with Europe. And that, in the 80s, the Vatican, as well as many European countries, disagreed with Ronald Reagan's policies in Central America. And that the right very much feels that South and Central America are their property. They're the property of America. Whereas Europe, the European imperialists, feel that the United States needs to share South and Central America with them, right? They don't feel like Cuba, the right wing of America feels that Cuba is America's property. I mean, Trump said it with regards to Venezuela. Venezuela is America's property. That's our oil they took. The British don't necessarily think that. They think it's Britain and America and France and Germany's oil, right? And there's a lot of, that the Europeans feel that imperialism overall, has the right to exploit South and Central America. And the Americans very much feel that they are the only ones that have the right to, that it belongs exclusively to America. And I've noticed that, and you'll notice this is long-standing. A lot of the more anti-war voices on the right are not anti-war when it comes to Latin America. I've noticed that, and that there are lots of people in America, especially now, that are completely pro-war, except when it comes to Cuba and Venezuela. And that's, and AOC, for example, AOC has spoken up about Cuba. Why? Because Trump is the guy doing it, and also because, for some reason, Latin America, AOC and Bernie have been pretty weak on these foreign policy issues, but, especially historically, you go back to the 80s, Bernie Sanders was very much in favor of a better relationship with Nicaragua. And so it's all muddled up and confused. That's all I can say about that. But at the end of the day, Russia just sent oil to Cuba. Russia has been the best friend of the Venezuelan government. And like Russia is aligned with anti-imperialist countries. Cuba and Venezuela and Nicaragua are anti-imperialist countries. And the Russiagate hysteria and the confusion around this has really confused people. I had an argument with a guy I shouldn't have, but on the day that Maduro was kidnapped, I was in Times Square interviewing protesters. I was first out in front of the courthouse, and then I went to Times Square. And when I was interviewing when I was interviewing protesters, I had one guy who was like a Cuba solidarity activist. I told him I was with RT. Oh, you must support kidnapping Maduro. I said, no, I don't. Venezuela and Russia are close. He said, that's bullshit. Venezuela and Russia are not close. I said, yes, they are. Russia and Venezuela are very close. They're both anti-imperialist countries. But this guy, in his mind, Venezuela, socialist, left-wing, Russia, bad, right-wing. And it's like, I was saying to him, like, what planet are you living on? Venezuela and Cuba are very, very close. Venezuela and Russia are very, very close. Russia and Cuba are very, very close. And this guy didn't even know that. And this guy is like somebody who's politically aware enough to protest in support of Venezuela, in support of Maduro, but his head is so far up, up the ass of wokeism, he doesn't know that Venezuela and Russia are allies. And it's like infuriating to me. And this is why wokeism is a cancer. I'm sitting there talking to a middle-aged man in his 50s and 60s who's wearing a pro-Maduro shirt, and he's cussing me out because I work at RT. And I said to them, you do know Russia is Venezuela's best friend. Bullshit, bullshit. Russia hates Venezuela. Putin's a right-winger. He hates communists. I'm like, that's not actually true. Venezuela and Russia are, and these people don't even know that because they are just so wokeified, right? They think the world consists of good people and bad people, and good people have rainbow flags and Black Lives Matter buttons, and bad people don't. And that's how yeah, he sounds like an old white hippie, and that bing, 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 bing. You are correct, Gabby. You are correct. And it's like they just don't understand. They have this good people versus bad people narrative. And it's like, I bet this guy probably doesn't know that abortion's illegal in Venezuela. I bet he doesn't know that. I bet he doesn't know that, gay marriage doesn't exist in Venezuela. I bet he doesn't know that either. Right. And it's like they have this definition where good people are woke, bad people are not. And he hears that Venezuela is socialist. He hears Trump talking against it. And he's a socialist because he probably thinks socialism means, taxing rich people to, give food stamps to poor people or something. He doesn't know what socialism is. So he supports Venezuela, but he hates Russia, and Russia could never support Venezuela. And it's just like, oh God. Oh God. So I just wanted to talk about that. I just wanted to talk about that for a little bit. But anyway, now that I've talked about all the issues I'm going to talk about, we're going to continue reading my new book. And after we've read through a couple more chapters of my new book, Mystical Stalinism, then I will answer your questions, and then we'll call it a night. So no one's sent in any questions yet. Please do. If you have any questions, please send them as Buy Me a Coffee. Go to Buy Me a Coffee and send your question. Buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin is the best way to send your question. We do have a couple Rumble rants that have come in, so that's good. So we have something we can answer in the second half of the show. But yeah, buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee. Send me a question to answer in the second half of the show. And that'll be fun. And so on that note, I'm going to start reading from my new book, which is called Mystical Stalinism and the Struggle Against Revisionism in America. And we're going to start, I believe last night we left off at chapter 8. We're chapter 8. So we're starting on page 91, chapter 8, The Essence of Stalinization. 1928 marked a significant shift in the tone of communist literature. Marxism was known for long polemical tracts and philosophical screeds. Starting in 1928, the communist parties began to put out a very down-to-earth, coherent message. William Z. Foster's 1932 book, Toward Soviet America, is a great example. The opening chapter explains the roots of the capitalist crisis. The second chapter hails the achievements of the Soviet Union in industrialization. The third chapter exposes the various attempts to liquidate the crisis by reformists and others. And the next chapter hails the Communist Party's revolutionary way out. And the final chapter lays out the vision of the United Soviet States of America. Moishe Olgin's Why Communism? Plain Talk on Vital Questions speaks with a similar clarity. Trotskyists and even anti-communists all can tell that starting in 1928, when Stalin, a seminary school dropout from Georgia, began leading the global communist movement, something changed in the way it presented its message and organized. The literary shift makes sense when understanding Stalin's experience as an organizer. While Lenin and other Bolshevik leaders had written theoretical screeds for Iskra, Stalin had been the editor of Pravda, the daily publication distributed by the Bolsheviks to factory workers prior to the 1917 revolution. Pravda was known for its worker correspondence, short, often anonymous letters describing conditions, inspiring action, and briefly stating political points in clear language. In the way the terms are described in What Is to Be Done, the daily newspaper Pravda was agitational, while the theoretical journal Iskra was propaganda. Stalin was an agitator who had a long career organizing workers of different nationalities throughout the Russian Empire. There was always a spiritual quality to Stalin's rhetoric. Another aspect of him, the cosmopolitan Trotsky fumed against. Stalin biographer Simon Sebag Montefiore writes, quote, Stalin was hostile to bumptious intellectuals, but he was less so with the less educated worker revolutionaries who did not arouse his inferiority complex. He played the teacher, the priest. The workers listened reverently to this young preacher, and it was no coincidence that many of the revolutionaries were seminarians, and the workers often pious ex-peasants. Trotsky, agitating in another city, remembered that many of the workers thought the movement resembled the early Christians and had to be taught that they should be atheists. Stalin had a deeply spiritual attachment to the peoples of the Russian Empire, in particular the peasantry, while Trotsky was loyal to a Western European radical movement. Stalin had a deep connection with the people he spent his life organizing, people who did not live in a sea-based global trade system, but rather came from tribes and nationalities that had lived in the same landlocked regions for thousands of years. Russian political theorist Alexander Dugin has fit the shift from Trotsky to Stalin into his geopolitical understanding of the Cold War. In his text, The Last War of the World Island, Geopolitics of Contemporary Russia, he writes, in December 1924, in one of his first works, The October Revolution and the Tasks of Russian Communists, a criticism of Trotskyism, Stalin asserted that socialism can be built in one country. The new theoretical attitude toward building socialism in one country was secured at the 14th Party Congress of the Russian Communist Party Bolshevik in December of 1925. Later on, building socialism in one country became an axiom of Soviet policy. Soviet Russia in the Stalin period represents a new version of the great tyrannic Eurasian Empire, the core of land-based civilization. Trotsky, while he was still in the USSR and with yet greater persistence after his immigration, advanced the idea that Stalin's state betrayed communism and recreated an imperial bureaucracy of the czarist type on a new stage. Thereby, Trotsky tore socialism away from its Eurasian context and ascribed the peculiarities of the USSR, which he criticized, to a return to a national Russian strategy. A very different point of view characterizes some contemporary Marxists, for instance, Constanzo Preve, who see an internal connection between socialism and continentalism, the civilizations of the land, and thereby consider the victory of socialism in land-based Russia and in other land-based traditional societies, China, Vietnam, Korea, etc., not an accident, but a regularity. Trotsky loved New York City and the West, so much so that when the Russian Revolution came in February of 1917, he regretted leaving for his homeland, writing, quote, "It would be a gross exaggeration to say that I learned so much about New York. I plunged into the affairs of American socialism too quickly, and I was straightway up to my neck in work for it. The Russian Revolution came so soon that I only managed to catch the general life rhythm of the monster known as New York City. I was leaving for Europe with the feeling of a man who had only a peep into the foundry where the fate of man is to be forged. My only consolation was the thought that I might return. Even now, I have not given up that hope." In 1928, the national headquarters of the Communist Party USA was moved from New York City to Chicago. Foster explained in Toward Soviet America that the capital of a future USA would be in the heartland, not in Washington, D.C. Quote, "The National Soviet government, with its capital in Chicago or some other great industrial center, will consist of a Soviet Congress made up of local delegates and meeting annually or as often as need be to work out the general policies of the government." The shift of the Communist Party from the city where the Hudson River meets the Atlantic, that is the home of Wall Street, to an industrial center in Illinois, where the meat packers had been organized in unions and daily hunger marches and communist-led strikes were taking place, was no accident. Trotsky was a socialist of the Atlanticist, globalist variety who wanted chaos and permanent revolution. Stalin was Country Joe from Georgia, a man who grew up among farmers and built unions and would preside over mobilizing his people to rapidly industrialize and defeat the most ruthless foreign invasion imaginable and eventually conquer outer space. The process of Stalinizing the Communist Party involved the following. 1. Breaking from social democracy, united front from below, forming independent unions, the American Federation of Labor, outside the American Federation of Labor, opposing the Socialist Party as an enemy, building an independent, unemployed labor movement aimed at recruiting among the population, not negotiating or competing with the established leaders of the working class movement. 2. A new, clearer style of rhetoric. Communist pamphlets explained politics clearly, laying out a vision of Soviet America for mass consumption. 3. Headquarters in Chicago, not New York, moving the headquarters of to the heartland of America and focusing on organizing Southern workers, Black people, and others who were unorganized. 4. A new focus on action. The Communist Party was no longer a tendency contending within leftism, but was what modern historians would call a cult of action. The slogan was, "Don't starve, fight." The Communist Party had a tone of go, 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 constantly expanding its ranks and visibility with massive demonstrations and daily outreach. The Stalinization of the global communist movement and the Soviet Union was overwhelmingly positive. It led to the Soviet Union industrializing and communist organizations asserting their own strengths as organizational powerhouses, no longer trapped by positioning themselves within the left. The changes in global communism that came after 1928 were a continuation of Bolshevism and the struggle against revisionism. Just as Lenin had condemned the Second International as part of the imperialist system and built an illiberal organization with new methods, Stalin led the Soviet Union and built an international movement based on principles that even less resembled Western radicalism. And now, Chapter 9, 2 Stalinist Parables. To illustrate what the Stalinization of the Communist Party USA really meant in terms of its rhetorical style, I have below republished almost verbatim 2 parables from communist literature of the era. The first is an excerpt from the book Labor's Untold Story, which was written and published by the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, UE. Richard O. Boyer and Herbert M. Moraes were both members of the Communist Party USA, and the United Electrical Workers UE Union was one of the only unions that the party was able to maintain control of during the McCarthy era, along with the International Longshore Warehouse Union, ILWU, and the International Union of Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers, IUMMSW, or Mine Mill. Even today, union staffers for the UE are required to read Labor's Untold Story, a text on the rise of the CIO as part of their orientation. The book tells the story of the history of the labor movement in America from the time of the Civil War all the way up to the sit-down strike wave and the Second World War. The text was published in 1955, before Khrushchev's secret speech. The authors were not academics, but UE organizers and Communist Party members. The story of Mr. Grossip is apparently a true story about an unemployed council in the 1930s with the name changed. The story of Mr. Grossip, from Labor's Untold Story by Richard O. Boyer and Herbert M. Moraes, 1955. Men and women struggled alone at first, viewing their plight as personal, private disasters, a slow and dreadful panic rising up within them. Such was the position of Peter Grossip, a working-class man with a habit of comfortable silence, a skilled cabinet maker who had worked for 20 years at the Tonti Custom Furniture Company in a Midwestern city of 300,000. Until he was laid off on January 1st, 1930, he had always regarded himself and his life with quiet satisfaction. He liked what was his. He liked his home, on which he owed only $1,800 on his first mortgage, and he liked his wife and 2 children, both attending university. Those times were super in the easy chair, or those times after supper in the easy chair were the times he liked the best. He never said much, but he'd rattle the daily record open and read. A lot of sense. A man got what he earned. You got more out of life than you put into it. After such a thought, he'd spy his wife Fanny's work, roughened fingers, and turn them around so that he could see the plain band, the wedding ring he had given her 21 years before. He liked that ring. That's the way evenings had been before he had been fired on January 1st, 1930. 18 months later, in the summer of 1931, they weren't much like that. Mr. Grossip still sat in his easy chair, but he sat there all day now, turning things over in his mind, trying to see where he had made his mistake. Maybe if he had gone into electrical engineering, something with a future, things wouldn't have gone this way. It wouldn't be so bad at first. Sometimes he would leave the house all dressed up in his best, and then he'd walk fast with his back very straight, his face carefully held to the bright alertness, trying to look as if he were hurrying to an important business meeting. But he always ended up in the park. He had $312 in the First National Bank when he was laid off. If it hadn't been for payments on the mortgage, $58.50 a month, it would have lasted longer. He still hated to part with his watch and was still always groping for it. It gave him an empty feeling, just like his vacant pocket when his hand reached for what wasn't there. He'd received only $15 for it, and Fanny had received even less for her wedding ring. Trying to make a fool out of me, he asked. Pawning your own wedding ring? I suppose you wish you'd married somebody else. Seemed like he'd fly off the handle for just about anything. Like when she asked him why he didn't go for a walk and he went goddamming around. That man couldn't stay in his own home without being driven out. He could hear his wife stirring in the kitchen, making the small rustling noises of a mouse as if she were afraid any louder noise might irritate him. The house was very still now. No money, and the man of the house was just sitting there doing nothing. For the last 6 months, notices had been coming from the bank about the lapsed mortgage payments. Any day now. Any day now. He didn't let himself complete the thought. The Daily Record was right, of course, when it pointed out that no one with get up and go, no one with real initiative and enterprise was on relief. Going down to the county relief office had been the worst. He had to stand in line with black workers and foreigners and people ragged enough to be bums. As a taxpayer and solid citizen, he never believed in the dole. Sure, he was a union man, but the AFL didn't believe in it either. And when he hadn't gone there until Fanny and he had been hungry, he tried to explain to the social worker at county relief that his case was different. He wasn't a bum. When he got on his feet again, she had given him a tired smile meant to be friendly, but seeming mocking to Mr. Grossip before saying, next. It was hard for two people to live on $12 a month. If he could only borrow some money for the mortgage, he called the bank, but they said it was too late now. The case was in the courts. There would be a judgment any day now. His wife was standing in the kitchen door looking at him. He pretended not to see her. Peter, she said, I just have to talk to you. Still, he didn't look at her. There was nothing to talk about. Peter, we have to do something. Do something? Do you think I sit here because I like to? Mr. Grossip's mouth quivered. Peter, you never used to talk that way to me. He glared at her. She did not retreat, but eyed him firmly. I've been talking to Mrs. Flattery next door. She says if you go down to the unemployment council, we wouldn't be evicted. Mr. Grossip was honestly shocked. Go down to that bunch of communists? I'd die first. Well, we've got to do something. The sheriff will be here any day now. In this excitement, Mr. Grossip rose to his feet from his chair and stood grandly alone. The Daily Record says that bunch is communistic. They can take my house, he said, and his voice broke queerly, but I am asking no help from any communist. They came the next day. Mr. Grossip couldn't believe it. Even as they began taking the beds and clumping through the house, moving the old sofa out into the street, he still couldn't believe it. They were robbing him, and he was alone. There was no one to help him. There was no police to call. They were the ones who were doing it, or at least deputy sheriffs. Mr. Grossip, like a troubled shadow, followed the deputies in and out, grabbing at the furniture that he thought might fall or be scratched. Out on the street, he stood bewildered, surrounded by the property which had made his days. A deputy was speculatively examining some of Mrs. Grossip's best linen. Neighbors were standing around, but Mr. Grossip could not meet their sympathy or even know it was that. Coming through the door, tottering in the grasp of two deputies who found it hard to grasp securely, was his easy chair. As Mr. Grossip ran to help, one of the deputies stumbled and the chair crashed down the steps. My God, Mr. Grossip cried, you can't do that. He was conscious of a neighbor plucking at his sleeve, trying to speak to him, but his outrage was so intense he did not answer. The deputies were standing on the porch now, looking at a group of men and women who had suddenly appeared. A tall, dark man, apparently in charge, stood next to Mr. Grossip. "Good God!" Mr. Grossip cried again, trying to right his chair and restore the big leather cushion. "You can't treat a man's property that way." He looked around, his face twitching. His neighbor pulled at him again and said, "We're from the Unemployment Council, and we want to help." "Well, my God," shrieked Mr. Grossip. "If you want to help, do something then." And the tall, dark man looked briefly at the 5 deputies on the porch and then at his unemployed. "Move it back," he said. And in an instant, before Mr. Grossip's very eyes, all of his prized possessions, his easy chair, even his big refrigerator, the bedpost, the pictures, everything was streaming back into his home. The neighbors began grabbing pots and pans and mattresses and stumbling a little and laughing wildly and calling out in excited tones, clumping up to the porch and into the house. Mr. Grossip never knew how it all happened. It was one happy blur. He had his home. He had his strength. He had his friends. His chair was put in its place. His wife seemed suddenly to have grown younger. Someone was making coffee and sandwiches in the kitchen. It was like a party. Everyone was shouting and laughing. And Mr. Grossip shook his hands with at least 24 men who he had never met before. The bold and brash leader of the unemployed was Hugh Henderson, a sandwich in his hand, and he was making a speech on the front porch. Mr. Grossip somehow found himself making a speech too. "After a life of hard work," he said, "taking a man's home, it isn't right. They put my chair, everything out onto the street. I worked hard my whole life. It isn't right." And there were cheers, and some of the crowd went away. "We'll stay for a while," Mr. Henderson said, "to be sure that the police won't come back." A great tension, an awful loneliness was slowly seeping from Mr. Grossip's veins. He hadn't known how miserable he had been. A man couldn't do anything by himself. He hadn't known how many people had been going through the same thing. Something had happened to him. He felt as if he had broken from the prison of his baffled self. No longer did he sit at home all day. Still, there were times on the picket line, as he helped move someone else's furniture back in, that he wondered at the tight little interned man he had once been. It hadn't been much fun. The second parable, highlighted and reprinted here, comes from the biography of Angelo Herndon, the African-American communist organizer who faced the death penalty in Georgia for distributing leaflets. As an organizer of the unemployment councils in 1932, he was arrested under a law that predated the abolition of slavery, making it a death penalty offense to encourage Black people to revolt. In April of 1937, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned his conviction, and he was freed from death row. His autobiographical pamphlet, "You Cannot Kill the Working Class," was published by the Communist Party after he was freed by a close 5-4 decision of the court. It tells of how the Communist Party handled the question of racism while organizing for economic justice. The Story of Jim, from "You Cannot Kill the Working Class" by Angelo Herndon, 1937. I remember especially one white worker, a carpenter, who was one of the first people I talked to in Atlanta. He was very friendly to me. He came to me one day and said that he agreed with the program, but something was holding him back from joining the Unemployment Council. "What's that, Jim?" I asked. Really, though, I did not have to ask. I knew the South, and I could guess. "Well, I just figured that white folks and Negroes shouldn't mix together," he said. It won't never do good to organize them into one body. I said, look here, Jim, you know that the carpenters and all the other workers get a darn sight less pay for the same work in the South than they do in other parts. Did you ever figure out why? He hadn't. Well, I said, I'll tell you why. It's because the bosses have got us split up down here. Southern workers are as good fighters as anywhere else, but yet we haven't been able to get equal wages with workers in other places, and we haven't got any rights to speak of. That's because we've been divided. When the whites go out on strike, the bosses call the black workers in to scab. And when the black workers strike, the bosses call the white workers to scab. Did you ever figure out why the unions here are so weak? It's because the whites don't want to organize with black people, and the black people don't trust the whites. We've got to get the simplest human rights down here. We're not allowed to organize. We're not allowed to hold our meetings except in secret. We can't vote, most of us, because the bosses are so anxious to keep the Negroes from voting that they make laws that take this right away from white workers, too. We Southern workers are like a house that is divided against itself. We're like an army that goes out to fight the enemy and stops on the way because its men are all fighting each other. Take this relief business now, I said. The commissioner tells the whites that they can't give them any more relief because they have to feed so many black people. And the black people ought to be chased back to the farms. And then they turn around and tell the Negroes that us off get us scrapping with each other. Now, suppose the white unemployed and the black unemployed all go to the commissioner together and say, we're all starving and we're all in need. We've decided to get together into one strong, powerful organization to make you come across with relief. Don't you think that would bring results, Jim? I asked him. Don't you see how foolish it is to go into a fight with half an army when we could have a whole one? Don't you think that an empty belly is a pretty punk exchange for the honor of being called a superior race? And can't you realize that as long as one foot is chained to the ground, the other cannot travel very far? Jim didn't say anything more that day. I guess he went home and he thought it over. He came back about a week later and invited me to his house. And it was the first time he'd ever had a black person in his house as a friend or an equal. And when I got there, I found two other black workers that Jim had brought into the unemployment council. About a month later, Jim beat up a rent collector who was boarding up the house of an evicted black worker. Then he went to work and organized a committee of white and black to see the mayor about the case. Today, it's the black worker across town. Tomorrow, it'll be me, Jim told the mayor. There are a lot of Jims today all over the South. We've organized a number of block committees of the unemployment councils. We've got rent and relief for a large number of families, and we've agitated endlessly for unemployment insurance. In the middle of June of 1932, the state closed down all the relief stations. A drive was organized to send the jobless to the farms. We gave out leaflets calling for a mass demonstration at the courthouse to demand that relief be continued. And about 1,000 workers came. 600 of them were white. We told the commissioners we didn't intend to starve. We reminded them that $800,000 had been collected by the community chest. The commissioners said there wasn't a cent to be had. But on that very day, the commissioner voted $6,000 for relief to the jobless. Stalin did not personally write either of these stories, but Stalinists did. and they carry with them key signatures that go right back to Moscow, to the big boss himself. Firstly, rather than polemics or theoretical screeds, they are workers' correspondence, retelling of events from the class battlefield. These kinds of texts were what Stalin became known for publishing as the editor of Pravda. Stalin began working for the newspaper in 1912, but amid the crisis of 1917, he was chosen, along with Kamenev and Molotov, to edit the publication. The newspaper was known for anonymous accounts narrating the class struggle with political points thrown in. Secondly, the stories involve organizers engaging with non-revolutionaries or people reluctant to accept their ideas. One of Stalin's poems, written as a 17-year-old activist, told of the pain of being rejected by those unwilling to hear the revolutionary message. He wanders like a shadow from door to door through the world, holding in his hands the oak panduri and playing it tenderly. In the sounds so full of dreams, as the rays of the sun, you can hear pure truth and divine love. Many stony frozen hearts started beating then. Many blinded frozen minds turned to the light again. But instead of gratitude for the sounds of sweet love, the mob brought the anchorite, the cup full of poison. And they told him, drink it, be damned, to fulfill your destiny. We do not need your truth, nor your heavenly voice. Jim and Mr. Grossip are both hostile to the communist message at first, but face economic circumstances and persuasive arguments that tell them otherwise. Stalin spent his life prior to 1917 going to different corners of the Russian Empire, engaging with hostile people and winning them over to join the Bolshevik-led unions and organizations that led them in struggle. In the city of Batumi, Stalin led oil workers who struck for better pay. When their union brothers were arrested, Stalin and other union members went and pulled down the walls of the jail. Stalin, like the unemployed organizers quoted in the passages above, had many conversations with workers who were at first hostile to his ideas but embraced them. Racism and ethnic division was something Stalin dealt with as an organizer. Often, the workers Stalin sought to organize were of different tribal and ethnic backgrounds, and often they were divided between Muslims and Christians. Simon Monteford's biography, Young Stalin, tells of him organizing against the devils who divide us, preaching that the ruling elite were responsible for inciting bigotry in order to exploit working people. Thirdly, both stories are themed around a very Christian theme of redemption. A racist and grumpy man who is indifferent to others' suffering, a racist and a grumpy man who are indifferent to others' suffering are both born again by joining the communist movement. These parables are purported to be true accounts written by Stalinist disciples about how they spread the good word among the fallen world and won over lost souls. The final passage of the UE text says, a great tension, an awful loneliness was slowly seeping from Mr. Grossip's veins. He hadn't known how miserable he had been. A man couldn't do anything by himself. He had known how many people he hadn't known how many people had been going through the same thing that he had. Something had happened to him. He felt as if he had broken from the prison of his baffled self. No longer could he sit home all day. This is a deeply evangelical tone, with the communist movement offering reconciliation and brotherhood, as well as forgiveness to those who accept it, not a tone of spreading chaos and vengeance. The revolutionary movement offers protection from the cruelty of an unjust world and love and connection with others. Both Jim and Mr. Grossip are men of privilege, taught they are superior, but yet they overcome their racism and arrogance. They come to humble themselves, standing arm in arm with and fighting alongside with those they once looked down on as inferior. This is the seminarist aspect of Stalin's personality and the leadership style that is so widely condemned by Trotsky and others. Chapter 10, The Psychology of the Popular Front. It is common among Trotskyites and anti-communists to argue that the Seventh World Congress, the last gathering of the Communist International, and the rise of the Popular Front or the People's Front was a total reversal and repudiation of the Third Period. Starting from Trotsky right up to today, the talking point of anti-communists has been of zigzags. Trotsky's book, The Revolution Betrayed, speaks of zigzags in leadership and argues that the Stalinist bureaucracy shifted its line opportunistically, abandoning Leninist principles. Trotsky wrote, "From the crises of the past, we shall see later on, derive important indications of the future. But besides that, a historic glance at the economic policy of the Soviet government and its zigzags has seemed to us necessary in order to destroy that artificially inculcated individualistic fetishism, which finds the source of success, both real and pretended, in the extraordinary quality of the leadership and not in the conditions of socialized property created by the revolution." Even in this criticism of the inconsistency and economic and foreign policy, Trotsky cannot help but make a spiritual or psychological critique that is at the center of so much of his work. He fumes with rage at the individualistic fetishism that saw in Stalin an extraordinary quality of leadership, the deep connection that the Georgian hero and labor organizer had with his people, which Anna Louise Strong observed and doubted other Bolshevik leaders had anything close to, is something Trotsky simply doesn't discount, but is annoyed by. However, it is this very psychological or spiritual reality that points to the brilliance and success of the Popular Front. When one examines the Popular Front and the change in communist international tactics that followed the Seventh World Congress in 1935, one can see that while it is a dramatic and complete tactical shift, it was built on the foundations of 1928 Stalinization and represented a further maturation of the anti-revisionist politics and break with Western radicalism that defined communism. Even before 1935, writers like R. Palm Dutt and others were documenting how fascism was not a choice by malintended imperialist leaders, but rooted in the economic foundations of the capitalist crisis. A prolonged crisis of overproduction was making an authoritarian, destructive state the only way to stabilize society and maintain the rule of profits. As Dutt explained, capital can no longer utilize the productive forces. Capital can no longer utilize the full labor power of the productive population. Monopoly capitalism is more and more visibly choking the whole organization of production and exchange. The working masses can no longer find even the former limited conditions of existence within the conditions of capitalism. Increasing millions are thrown aside as superfluous. The standard of all are successfully attacked. Intensification of labor of the dwindling numbers employed is accompanied by worsening standards. The class struggle grows more intense. New forms of widening mass struggle develop. New and intenser methods of repression and coercion are brought into play by the ruling class. Two alternatives, and only two, confront the existing society at the present stage of development of the productive forces and social organization. One is to throttle the development of the productive forces in order to save class society, to destroy material wealth, to destroy millions of superfluous human beings in a slow rot of starvation and the quick furnace of war, to crush down the working class movement with limitless violence, to arrest the development of science and culture and education and technique, to revert to more primitive forms of limited, isolated societies, and thus to save, for a while, the rule of the possessing classes at the expense of a return to barbarism and spreading decay. This is the path which finds its most complete expression in fascism. The other is to organize the productive forces for the whole of society by abolishing class ownership of the means of production and building up the classless communist society, which alone can utilize and organize the modern productive forces. This is the path of communism, the revolutionary working class. The issue of these two paths is the issue of the present epoch. It is the former of these two alternatives that the existing capitalist world is today moving at an increasing pace, and and to which it will more and more visibly develop in the coming period ahead if the revolutionary working class does not succeed in time in saving the whole future of civilization and human culture. As Georgy Dimitrov put it in his remarks on August 2nd, 1935, to the gathering representing millions organized into communist parties throughout the world, quote, "The imperialist circles are trying to shift the whole burden of the crisis onto the shoulders of working people. That is why they need fascism. They are trying to solve the problems of markets by enslaving the weak nations, by intensifying colonial oppression, and repartitioning the world anew by means of war. That is why they need fascism. They are striving to forestall the growth of the forces of revolution by smashing the revolutionary movement of the workers and peasants, and by undertaking a military attack against the Soviet Union, the bulwark of the proletariat. That is why they need fascism." The breakdown of capitalism mandated mass destruction and degrowth in order to keep the economy rolling. Fascism emerged as a movement to bring it into being. Fascism was not left-wing or right-wing. It was not defined by nationalism, racism, or even authoritarianism. Dutt's groundbreaking work showed that fascism was not an ideology, but a political mishmash thrown together to build an authoritarian movement to enact the needs of big capital amid a crisis. Fascism was invented to serve the needs of the Western imperialist system as it entered a crisis. It was liberalism collapsing into authoritarian illiberalism in order to enact the destruction of productive forces the situation required. As Dutt explained, it is evident that this definition of fascism is equally useless as an explanation of the real essential character of fascism. Wherein there lies the specific character of fascism? The specific character of fascism cannot be defined in terms of abstract ideology or political first principles. The specific character of fascism can only be defined by laying bare its class basis. The system of class relations within it develops and functions, and the class role which it performs. Only so can fascism be seen in its concrete reality, corresponding to a given historical stage of capitalist development and decay. All capitalism is naturally moving toward fascism, as gluts of overproduction and a falling rate of profit are the built-in failure of the irrational profit system and get worse and more frequent as technology advances. Other than society rationally organizing the economy, the only hope for stabilizing an increasingly unstable economy as technology advances is a highly controlled, state-directed destruction and degrowth. Fascism and war are the needs and natural outgrowth of decaying capitalism. By 1935, Hitler was in power in Germany, and around the Western world, many industrialists and financiers were aligned with him and his mission to crush labor unions and the Soviet Union. Whereas the British and American banking elite saw Germany as a rival imperialist power, reasserting itself, and were willing to tolerate the expansion of industrial unions and court the USSR as an ally in the struggle against it. The, quote, democratic bourgeoisie of Rockefeller and Rothschild wanted to dominate global oil markets and international banks. The, quote, fascist bourgeoisie of Krupp, Schacht and Tyson in Germany, and Ford and Morgan in America wanted to smash industrial unions and expand military spending to stabilize the economy and eliminate the communist threat. On this basis, the Communist International shifted its policy away from courting industrialists as allies and opposing social democrats to aligning with social democrats and all who opposed fascism while building industrial unions and waging a dramatic struggle against fascism. It was a huge turnaround, a complete tactical reorientation. It simply would not have been possible if the Communist International had not solidified against Trotskyism and the Bukharinite right opposition and centralized around Stalin's line in 1928. Only the clarity and discipline established by Stalinization of 1928, the removal of the naysayers and relentless skeptics who made up the oppositions, made it possible for millions of people to dramatically alter their orientation and tactics so rapidly. Furthermore, the understanding of where fascism came from and why the Soviet Union had to reorient came from the very positions the third period had solidified, namely the crisis of overproduction, the importance of an action-based struggle organization to lead the working class in such a crisis, and the contrast between the Soviet Union's rapid industrialization and the Western world's economic crisis. As Georgy Dimitrov was presenting the orientation for the new tactical line to a gathering in Moscow, he made this important statement regarding fascist propaganda and how to counter it. Under no circumstances must we underrate the power of ideological infection. Fascists are rummaging through the entire history of every nation so as to be able to pose as the heirs and continuers of all that was exalted and heroic in the past. Mussolini does his utmost to make capital for himself out of the heroic figure of Garibaldi. The French fascists bring to the fore the heroine Joan of Arc. The American fascists appeal to the traditions of the War of Independence and Washington and Lincoln. We communists are the irreconcilable opponents in principle of bourgeois nationalism in all its forms, but we are not supporters of national nihilism and should not act as such. The task of educating the workers and all working people in the spirit of proletarian internationalism is one of the fundamental tasks of the Communist Party. But anyone who thinks that this permits him to sneer at the national sentiments of the broad masses has understood nothing about the teachings of Lenin and the national question. This statement was highlighted by a British psychoanalyst named Reuben Osborne, who composed his book, Freud and Marx, A Dialectical Study, 2 years later. In this text, he highlighted the phenomena of transference by the psychoanalytic tradition and how it caused people to subconsciously relate to national heroes and political leaders in the way that an infant idealizes its parental figures. Quote, if then the problem of leadership is important, it must be tackled in a consciously thought out manner which utilizes all that modern psychology has to offer on the subjective characteristics involved. And if psychology tells us that no movement will win the support of the masses, which does not offer a leader who adequately arouses the emotional attitudes which we have seen relate to the child-parent situation, then a movement which boasts of its scientific outlook must hasten to provide such a leader. If Hitler and Mussolini, by deliberate publicity and propaganda methods, can be presented as saviors of the people, so too can communist leaders. The difference, of course, is that the repudiation of communist leaders will not be built on deceitful promises and demagogic flourishes, but upon a genuine determination to lead the workers in revolutionary struggle. Osborne goes on to link the loyalty one has to their country to a similar parental transference impulse. For there is a striking symbolic parallel between the adult's attitude toward his native land and his early childhood relationship to his parents. This is illustrated in the use of the terms motherland and fatherland toward the land in which he was born. The individual feels the attitude which he first felt toward the mother who bore him. His motherland nourishes and sustains him in the same way as did his own mother. Toward his native land, therefore, the individual directs the unsatisfied love and affection which were denied outlet during childhood. This symbolic representation of the mother by the country of one's birth receives vivid forms in many turns of speech. Thus, one hears reference to the country which bore one rather than the country in which one was born. And the threat of enemy invasion is referred to as a threat of violation of the motherland. Nor are these mere metaphorical representations. In his follow-up text, The Psychology of Reaction, British communist psychoanalyst expounded on the further point. Essentially, communism as a movement rooted in the left appeals to people's Oedipal and libidinal impulses and their desire to unleash these often deeply suppressed inner drives. Whereas fascism appeals to people's infantile attachment to parents and need for protection. Osborne's text argued that communism needs to appeal to healthier emotions and pivot away from the libidinal and Oedipal appeal. This is precisely what international communism did during the Popular Front era, starting at the Seventh World Congress. Under Stalin's brilliant leadership, the Communist International shifted away from the libidinal and Oedipal appeal of red flags and barricades toward building a movement based on patriotism and community solidarity. Communism was becoming even further away from leftism by reinventing its aesthetics. An iconic photo of the Communist Party's 1938 National Convention in a Chicago auditorium featured a gigantic bust of Abraham Lincoln with smaller portraits of Lenin and Stalin below it. The words peace, security, democracy, and friendship between the people of USA and USSR are displayed on banners. This powerful decoration scheme, overlooking a crowd of thousands assembled for a communist rally, fit nicely with Earl Browder's famous slogan, "Communism is nothing but 20th century Americanism." And here is the famous photo of the Chicago auditorium with Abraham Lincoln. That was the Communist Party convention. And here's Earl Browder's famous slogan, "Communism is 20th century Americanism." For Earl Browder's 1936 presidential campaign, an anthem was composed called "The Man from Kansas," presenting him as a man from America's heartland fighting for the common people in line with the traditions of Lincoln and Jefferson. This was even further anti-revisionism. Communism was not a form of leftism seeking to behead the king and spread chaos. During the brilliant pivot of the Popular Front, communism was the expression of the democratic aspirations of every Western nation, armed with an understanding of the economic foundations of fascism. Communists were the most loyal patriots, building the movement against fascism that would ultimately necessitate rationally organizing the economy to serve the needs of the working class. When one watches films like Why We Fight, the Why We Fight series produced by Frank Capra to explain the Second World War to U.S. servicemen, or the film version of U.S. President Henry Wallace's Century for the Common Man speech, both of which praise Stalin and the Bolshevik Revolution excessively as having commonality with America's struggle against the British and later against slavery, hailing the USSR as allies against the Nazis, it becomes clear that the Popular Front went beyond the Communist Party. The Communist Party, which mobilized everything for victory, was part of a bigger layer in America that involved the Roosevelt administration, the labor unions, the artistic and cultural anti-fascist associations, and a large layer in Hollywood. The message was that America was a country born in the struggle for justice and labor organizing, opposition to racism, and calls for a more just economic order fit very well into our national heritage. The message was that fascism was a foreign conspiracy to incite bigotry, sow division, and unleash the cruelty and savagery of more primitive times. So many films and works of art from this period, including the many social realist paintings on the walls of post offices and public buildings created by Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration, depict this optimistic, pro-working class, anti-racist message. One cultural piece that emerged during the Popular Front years and has remained part of American TV, movies, and comics for the last 80 years was the fictional character called Superman. The comic book was first published in Cleveland, Ohio, 1939. Superman spoke of truth, justice, and the American way. He condemned racism. He fought for striking workers against corrupt employers. In fact, his nickname, Man of Steel, was a literal translation of the name Stalin. The Popular Front wasn't only in America. It was a global shift. Communism as a movement shifted to a tone of brotherhood, national pride, optimism, and progress, mixed in with anti-fascism, labor unionism, and a call for a new economic system. It was this optimistic tone that thousands of international volunteers went to Spain to fight against the rise of fascism and defend the Republic. With this spirit, communists filled the streets of London to defend a Jewish neighborhood from Oswald Mosley at the Battle of Cable Street in 1936. In America, the Popular Front communists led the Great Flint Sit-Down Strike, when the victorious auto workers of the newly formed union marched out of their plant with a signed contract on February 11th, 1937, after having occupied their factory for 44 days and fought off police and company thugs. They carried an American flag. The single black worker in the plant was the one who carried it as a political statement of anti-racism, as part of the American spirit. This bold act, noticed by crowds of thousands who had assembled outside the plant to support the workers, was undoubtedly the work of communist leaders like Wyndham Mortimer, Bob Travis, and Henry Krause. These Communist Party labor organizers had been trained by William Z. Foster and had been key in organizing the plant occupation. The Communist Party rallied around the slogan, "Equal rights for Negroes everywhere," and had advanced and attracted figures like Langston Hughes, Richard Wright, and Paul Robeson to its ranks. Trotsky began to absorb those who loved the leftist tone of rebellion and revenge and could not stomach the Popular Front shift. The naysayers of City College in Manhattan, who considered the Popular Front a betrayal and wanted barricades, firing squads, and blood in the streets, grouped around Max Shachtman and Irving Kristol in cafeteria alcoves, spitting on their Stalinist classmates and muttering about Stalin the Butcher and writing sarcastic songs about how the communist line's been changed again. In Minneapolis, the Trotskyites aligned with a collection of Teamster Union thugs who voted against Roosevelt and worked to get the Communist Party banned from labor unions. Among those trained by Trotskyite leader Farrell Dobbs was soon-to-be Republican-aligned corrupt union boss Jimmy Hoffa. Communism was a movement of people motivated by love for their homeland, opposition to racism and fascism, and an understanding of that a new economic system was needed to bring justice for all. Osborne provides his analysis of Trotskyism in The Psychology of Reaction. Quote, "So far, we have studied the irrational impulses of millions of people who give their support to fascism. We have also studied the psychology of individuals who place themselves at the head of fascist parties, who, impelled by infantile motives of self-display and aggression, serve with their tortures and vainglorious proclamations the needs of decaying capitalism. It would be, however, a serious mistake to assume that these psychological characteristics are restricted only to followers of fascism and fascist leaders. The Marxist outlook is essentially rational and objective. It corresponds, in other words, to the facts of the real world. But this is not to say that all those who adopt the Marxist outlook are automatically freed from irrationalities and unconscious infantile compulsions. The Marxist outlook can be equally with any other outlook be adopted by an individual seeking an intellectual justification for inner compulsions. The Russian Revolution, for example, undoubtedly provided, in its general hostility to czardom and capitalism, its unleashing of hate and anger, its need for inspiring revolutionary leaders, an opportunity for sadists and exhibitionists of every kind to find ample scope within the revolutionary movement for their inner compulsions. The objective needs of the revolution coincided magnificently with their subjective desires. Talented exhibitionists like Trotsky and Zinoviev delivered flaming orations, became inspiring figures, and in the fulfillment of their exhibitionistic impulses, also fulfilled an objective revolutionary need. But with the passing of the Civil War, with the stabilizing of the structure of the newly erected socialist society, other tasks became necessary. It became necessary for the energies of revolutionary leadership to be devoted to the more prosaic tasks involved in the economic reconstruction of the country. The excitement and glory of the Civil War had passed. The Civil War was a phase that no sane Marxist wished to prolong, but it was an unavoidable means to the establishment of socialism, not an end unto itself. But those Marxists, or as Lenin called them, the RR revolutionists, for whom the revolution was an opportunity to protest, to denounce, to pose as heroes, to indulge in terror for the sake of terror, could only see in the painstakingly less romantic devotion to the tasks of construction of a socialist society in Russia the sacrifice of the world revolution. Psychologically, they were suited for the aggressive, destructive phase of the revolution. They naturally wanted to prolong this phase and to extend it. They wanted the permanent revolution, to indulge in adventuristic incursions in other capitalist countries, bearing the torch of revolution. They were unable to see that precisely in the unremitting devotion to the task of building a socialist society in Russia, would the torch of revolution and of the revolution flare in its beacon light for the rest of the world. The lesson of Trotskyism is this: within the revolutionary movement, a temporary home can be found for the most dangerous types, individuals who would not hesitate to destroy the movement the moment it ceased to serve their personal unconscious ends. The fact that they are themselves completely unconscious of the impulses driving them renders them all the more dangerous. They are impelled to disguise the real underlying motives of their actions from themselves and others. They do so by a display of Marxist erudition and energetic work for the movement during the time that its interests coincide with their subjective desires. And because they are so strongly impelled, because the revolutionary movement has become for them an important source of gratification for their unconscious impulses, they often become talented, efficient, and unsparing in their energies. It was on the basis of the Popular Front and this political line that the communists took power across Eastern Europe in the people's democracies, on the Korean Peninsula, and in China. In each of these countries, the Communist Party program was not one of revenge, but rather a message of national unity, economic growth, and anti-fascism. When one reads Kim Il-sung's radio message founding the Democratic People's Republic of Korea on a modest program of redistributing land, confiscating property from Japanese collaborators, and creating an educational system and national health service, one gets a sense of how effective this approach was. A similar understanding can be found when one reads Mao Zedong's optimistic statements on creating a new China with a people's republic based on a block of four great classes. An amazing spiritual power flowed from communism in this era. This can be found in the pages of books such as Edgar Snow's People's on Our Side, or his account of the Chinese Red Army, featuring the first interview with Mao Zedong, Red Star over China. What communism was in the lead up to and aftermath of the Second World War was a complete repudiation of revisionism. It was the peoples of the land, the Eurasian world island, being unleashed to find an amazing heroism within themselves, to make great sacrifices and repel foreign invaders, not just in self-defense, but on the promise that a new world was possible if the brutality of imperialism and its fascist incarnation could be smashed. In the democratic fight to defeat fascism, with communists at the center of it, led by Joseph Stalin, we find anti-revisionism at the height of its strength, a mass movement of millions and millions of people motivated by love and brotherhood and hope for the future, overcoming nightmarish conditions and pressing forward. And that ends chapter 10. We're at page 136. We got Mao and Edgar Snow's picture there. And we're more than halfway through my book, Mystical Stalinism and the Struggle Against Revisionism in America. Yeah. So we just read the 2 chapters on, the Stalinization part and the part on the Stalinist parables and also on the Popular Front and anti-fascism. I hope you all are starting to get the point of this book, that Stalin was so much more than a communist. He represented much bigger trends, and that there are different, psychological impulses and political currents and drives that manifest themselves within Marxism. So I hope you all enjoyed that. If you got any questions for the second half of the show, please send them now. Rumble Rants, Caleb Moppin 22 on Cash App. But the best way to do it is buy me a coffee. Let's do the roll call, and then from there I'll start answering any questions we've got, and then we'll be done for the night. So names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Ryan in Kansas City. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Who is with us? Names and locations. Ryan in Kansas City. I'm kind of wondering. I had my nose in a book for the second half of the show there. Kind of wondered what people said. But yeah. Right. Yeah. Names and locations. Dan in LA, Louisville, Kentucky, Ed, Joel in Puerto Rico, Rose, Penny in Minnesota, Los Angeles, Patch in Arizona. Names and locations. Carolyn and Dario from Brooklyn. Good to see you. Jane in New Zealand. Good to see you. Good to see you. Patch in Arizona. Good to see you. Samuel in the Far East. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Nico in San Diego. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Jenny in Cincinnati. Good to see you. Good to see you. Anybody else? Names and locations. Artie in New Mexico. Good to see you, Artie. Alex in Panorama City. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. All right. Anybody else? Names and locations. Jenny in Cincinnati. Nico in San Diego. Anybody else? Hello, Dark. All right. Zach in Michigan. Good to see you, Zach. All right. The South, Huey Long. Good to see you. All right. So we don't seem to have any buy me a coffee questions that have come in. We don't have any questions that have been sent via buy me a coffee. We do have a couple Rumble rants that have come in. Hempcar says the Iran lobby said Trump administration said to Axios that there's a 90% chance he'll strike. We don't know what that means. We've been here before and the attack hasn't happened. Let's hope this is a similar situation. Penny sent an English audio of Burkina Faso. Okay. So, this is the Burkina Faso expressway with English audio that Penny sent. So let's put that on, right? This is about construction. This is more, civilization of the land and anti-imperialism. This is anti-imperialism in Burkina Faso. So let's put this on with English audio about the construction of the highway. All right, here we go. All right, this is about the construction work happening in Burkina Faso under the revolutionary government of Ibrahim Traore. We are huge fans of Ibrahim Traore and CPI. This is Penny's book that we published about Ibrahim Traore and his anti-imperialism and his revolutionary pro-growth construction government on the African continent that's investing in people. So yeah, let's put on the video about the highway.
This morning we are at the Burkina Faso highway site, and as you know, the project was launched by the president of Burkina Faso on December 16, 2025, who naturally instructed us to monitor the work. Today we are here to take stock, or at least monitor the first phase of the work, which consists of preparatory work for cleaning and clearing the right-of-way. In any case, we are pleased to note that the work has been fully completed over a 332-kilometer stretch all up. In less than 2 months, we have completely completed the route. So this is the place for us, in any case, to congratulate the FOMPO team, led by the Director General, and to say that we encourage them to start the second phase, which mainly consists of earthworks. And what we have learned in many cases, the machines are effectively positioned for this earthworks as well. So it is truly an achievement, and we really want to congratulate them and encourage them for the continuation of the work.
We are very honored to welcome the Minister of National Construction this morning, and this proves that this challenge given by Comrade Ibrahim Traore is taken very seriously by everyone, by the entire population. So we are very honored to welcome him this morning. As of today, you can see that since February 5, we have finished clearing and cleaning, and I can currently say that the other stages have already begun, in particular the stacking and the various drillings for the various water points, and while we wait, of course, for the actual start. First of all, I was going to start by saying that at the base there is, of course, the vision of Comrade Captain Ibrahim Traore and the acquisition of more than 100 bubbles. So this armada has, of course, equipped the fossil Merbo teams, and we had very dynamic personnel who spared no effort to ensure success and speed. This is also the place for me to salute, in fact, all the traditional authorities, the administrative authorities who were with us and who at all times were levers, in fact, to resolve the various problems that we encountered and during the short-term clearing. Haley D. You should know, actually, that the site preparation has started in the Tita area. So currently, we are in the middle of earthworks, which in fact have already started, because for a project of this scale, there are several tasks that must be carried out simultaneously.
That's great. I'll just say we are huge fans of Ibrahim Traore. Like I said, we published this great, pamphlet book by Penny. And we had a rally to support Ibrahim Traore, and I'm going to put that video on in case anyone wants to take kind of their last chance to send any questions they might have. We do buy me a coffee is the best way to send any question you might have for me to answer. Buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. You can also do Rumble rants, cash at me, Caleb Maupin 22. But yeah, I might as well show the video of Ibrahim Traore. All right, of the rally we did during the 7-day program. This was our rally to support Ibrahim Traore.
In Rockford, Illinois, and we're here to say that Ibrahim Traore is right and AFRICOM is wrong.
Hands off Traore! Hands off Africa! Hands off Traore! Hands off Africa! Hands off Traore! Hands off Africa! Hands off Traore!
Today we're speaking about Ibrahim Traore, all the good things he has done. He is actually a leader that's provided true inspiration, not just for his people of Burkina Faso, but for everyone around the world.
Are in the belly of what is happening around the world. We get up, we go to work, we go home, we get online. We pretend like we don't know, but we do know. We feel the crushing imperialist boot on our necks, and can we get it off? Yes, we can!
Yes, we can!
Fuck yeah!
Fuck yeah!
We can!
Yes, we can!
Don't let them stop you.
Ibrahim Traore is the President Ibrahim Traore, the traditional president of Burkina Faso.
I think he's a remarkable leader for the whole world. Whenever I see him, I'm really compelled by him.
Taking hands off of Ibrahim Traore, and we're representing the Center for Political Innovation because we want economic development. We don't want degrowth.
People are liking it, huh?
Yeah, a lot of people are receptive or at least curious.
And I think if we take an example like this, and stand up for countries like this and learn from it, we too have a better prosperity, not just for ourselves now, but for generations to come.
So unique and so different from the various other leaders of the world. He's amazing to me.
Down with NATO!
Down with NATO!
Hands off Africa!
Hands off Africa!
Down with NATO!
Down with NATO!
Hands off Africa!
Hands off Africa!
We are an energized group fighting for working families. We are an energized group fighting for the world. We want this message to get out to everyone, far and wide, to get off your butts, to make it happen. We are one because we are in this fight together.
We've got Africa's Flame, the project Ibrahim Traore, the current president of Burkina Faso, who's doing beautiful, amazing things, building up the country for his people.
They kicked out the French. They formed an alliance with Mali and Niger. Security defense, economic defense. Traore is leading an agricultural revolution. They are training soldiers to be farmers. They're training farmers to be soldiers. And he's a Muslim. And it is now a crime in Burkina Faso to stir up religious division that undermines the unity of the country.
So we're supporting a real role model here.
Let me tell you a little bit about this man, Ibrahim Traore. This man is not only a leader for Burkina Faso who cares about the people of Africa and the people of the world, who's standing with Russia, who's standing with the people of the world against U.S. imperialism. And it's because that he's doing that they've made so many attempts on his life.
I would be willing to put my life on the line for him, to protect him, because he represents hope. He represents true hope and progress in this world, and I pray to God that nothing happens to him.
And my question is this: where does value come from? Where does value come from? They want you to think value comes down from the sky. They want you to think value comes from Wall Street derivative ripoff schemes. They want you to think value comes from Facebook likes and shares and hits. They want you to think value is magical. But the answer to where value comes from is within you. It is within you. It is your human labor power and your creativity. That is the source of all wealth in this world.
Yes.
And if we want to have a strong economy, we need to invest in human beings, invest in people, invest in children so they grow up and get an education and become strong and powerful and effective and smart. We need to invest in communities. We need to invest in families. That is the future.
Freedom. I think of economic growth. I think of someone who truly cares about the needs of the people and not the top 1% or the top 0.01% or whatever it is, which is the rest of the world seems to be focused on in the West anyway. We need economic development for everyone, not just for the people at the top. And that's the kind of system we're living under, why people are struggling so much.
We are here to proclaim that we will not be stopped. We will not let the imperialists threaten us. We will not let them intimidate us. We are CPI and we are here to fight for Africa.
Yeah. Like you guys in the US, ourselves in Australia, we're being held back by big finance, and we need to have a government of action across working families and ordinary working people.
Investing millions and millions of francs to revamp stadiums and hold games for youth sports so they can be healthy and strong and they can build an identity of their own in working together. Abraham Traore was a soccer player himself, and he just held a very friendly game with other professional soccer players, and he won 3 matches. How about that? Go Traore!
Go Traore!
Let all nations have self-determination and develop peaceful relationships, peaceful trade with each other, and innovate and share that innovation with each other so that we can live in peace, prosperity, and harmony, because there is plenty to go around.
This is the model of what can be here. You must fight. You must get up. You must be brave. Don't let them tell you that your words have no meaning, that they'll throw you in jail if you speak up. The more of us that speak up, what happens? Then more speak up, and more speak up. Don't let that frighten you. Get off your butts, do something about it. Fight for a future that you want.
We need a world where people refuse to take advantage of the downtrodden. We need to take an alternative road, because the road we're going is leading us to nowhere but to oblivion.
And this leader in Africa is a leader who understands that. And that is why he is investing in his people. He is providing free health care to mothers in the hospital. He is providing university education to his people. Not only is college free, but while you're there, you get a stipend, a paycheck, so you can focus on your studies. You don't have to work. Imagine that. The young people of Burkina Faso, in a way, are richer than all the young people in America. If you go to college in America, you're going to be in student debt for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, 20 years. In Burkina Faso, not only do you not go into student debt, but on top of that, you get a paycheck while you're there so you can pay your bills and focus on your studies. He is enabling millions and millions of people to rise up from poverty, to launch their own farms, to pave their roads. Fisheries are opening up. Pineapple orchards are opening up. This is a pro-growth president who invests in human beings and invests in his people.
There's nothing more important right now happening in the world than what's happening right here, in the belly of the beast, in the belly of imperialism. Can we make this happen? Yes. Yes, it can happen.
What we need is a win-win situation where we can find an economic system where deals or contracts whereby what makes America prosper also makes our trading prosper.
Better world is possible, but understand, if we don't believe that, if we listen to those who tell us that nothing is possible, then that's what we will get. We will get nothing.
Hands off Africa! Hands off Africa! Hands off Africa!
What can I say about imperialism, other than the fact that it is a crushing force that is now taking its way from the tentacles of the United States and around the world, sucking the resources from other countries, impoverishing them, degrowing them, crushing them, making sure that they can't become everything that they have dreamt of being.
Organizations such as the Center for Political Innovation is critical to spreading the awareness, the knowledge of leaders such as Ibrahim Traore.
And right now we don't have a government that invests in people. We have a government that invests in destroying people, a government that invests in bombs and tanks and weapons and prisons for profit, a government that defends drug cartels, a government that arms terrorist groups. And that is not the way forward. There's a small group of very, very rich people who sit at the top of the world. And they've decided that the only way they can keep their throne and keep themselves at the top is to stop human progress. And they're wrong, because there is no limit to growth. There is no limit to growth. Human creativity and brilliance is unlimited. And we can build and we can construct.
We got books! We got books!
I saw two cars pull up at the stop sign, and then they had their lights, they were flashing to get our attention. And then I saw a fist come out, and then I was like, oh yes, there's somebody who absolutely understands what we're doing. And then I saw a woman come out, and she started honking her horn, and then I didn't know there was a car behind her, and then we just started cheering. They were just honking. I heard them say thank you, because now they know what we're about, what we were doing, what we're standing for, why we're out here on this road, getting the attention of those who pass by. So they all honked. The car behind them came out and they honked as well. And they seemed extremely supportive, very happy that we're out here bringing awareness, you know, in a place where, likely of all places, which you see a big giant sign, a big, poster of Ibrahim Traore. But here we are, CPI, bringing awareness, making it happen, and understanding that people, the more we do this, it'll catch fire. Indeed. And it seems as though it already has.
I think, yeah, there's been a number of people that have positive reactions to our rally, to the banner, to our chants, to our speeches.
We will march together, we will fight together, no matter who you are, no matter what political persuasion, no matter what race, because we are all here fighting a class struggle that is more than the sum of its parts. We are one.
But I think if we're getting positive reactions like that out here, that's a very good sign. And it's a sign of progress, and it's a sign that people are starting to wake up.
Ibrahim Traore is working with Russia bad! Russia bad! Oh my God, Russia bad! No, Ibrahim Traore went to the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Russia, and he got to see their equipment, and he got to see their spirit of unity and their spirit of cooperation, and how they were able to defeat fascism, which we've never forgiven them for. So, also Ibrahim Traore is investing in education for his students to go to Russia, and Russia has students coming to Burkina Faso so they can learn each other's culture and they can build peaceful nuclear energy.
Yay!
Peaceful nuclear energy. Just
Peaceful
like
nuclear energy. Yep, that's us. That's CPI. I love my CPI community. We are an awesome group of people. And if you want to retweet that video, I think more people need to see that video and hear the message of it related to not just Burkina Faso, but to America and the kind of government we need. You can retweet that video. I just tweeted it out. I'll drop it in the chat here. But yeah, it's good stuff, folks. And it's related to the book I was reading just there, and the Stalinist parables and all of that. It's related to what I was telling you all about songs and all that. I mean, it's all related. Everything we talk about on here is related, right? We're doing something very, very special, and I love my CPI family. If you're not a member of CPI, you should join. You should become a member. And if you are a member, you should find your way to the 7-day workshop we're doing in August, and make sure that you're with us when we hit the streets and do important work this summer. We're going to be in the streets February 28th, No War with Iran. We're having house parties around the country for the Ides of March. I'm going to be going around the country to do some workshops coming up. So yeah, everybody, we're doing great stuff. Dare to struggle, dare to win. CPI is marching forward. I think there was one other Rumble rant I didn't answer. Yeah. When you guys protest against war with Iran, can you also hold up a card that says, tell Congress to act now and pass the Iran War Powers Resolution prohibiting war on Iran? Sure. Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. And it's good that Thomas Massey and Marjorie Taylor Greene and others are pointing out Congress never emphasized or never authorized an attack on Iran. That's important. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it hasn't happened yet. I hope that there is no attack on Iran. I think great things are happening. Don't feed the trolls. We just whatever. It's fine. This channel is getting a lot of attention for many different reasons, for the Epstein videos, for a lot of different stuff. So I don't think all of them are necessarily trolls. I think some of them are people that are sincerely racist, right? And maybe they're in their racism. They are attracted to some of what we say, criticizing the status quo, but then they hit a wall, and it is what it is. We are not changing our message for anybody. I have been preaching anti-imperialism. I've been learning and maturing in my politics, right? This is like stream 1008 or something like that. But we're not changing for anybody. We're not going to pander to anybody. We're not even monetized. We're demonetized, and yet we keep going. We keep going. So, I guess nobody had any buy me a coffees tonight. That's okay. It happens sometimes. I'll be back probably tomorrow night. If not, if not sooner than that, or if not, the next night or whatever. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing on this channel. Join the Center for Political Innovation. Buy my new book. If you liked what I was reading to you on here, buy it. Get yourself a copy of it. I'll keep reading it. Dare to struggle, dare to win. We are winning. We are marching forward. So I hope that you all are going to have a great night. I'm going to put on the closing music. And it's been fun. It's been fun, y'all. We're doing good stuff. We're doing good stuff. And our community is resilient. Our community never backs down. We march forward. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.